Paulina Stevens and Jezmina Von Thiele. Welcome to the Witch Wave.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we're happy to be here.
And just for my listeners who might not be watching this on YouTube, can you each introduce yourself so they know your voices? Paulina, why don't you go first?
I'm Paulina Stevens.
Fabulous.
And I'm Jezmina Von Thiele.
Thank you so much. That was very well done. So, we are here on the occasion of your new book, which is called Secrets of Romani Fortune Telling, Divining with Tarot, Palmistry, Tea Leaves, and more. And I'm so thrilled to read this book because it was such an education for me. And I consider myself as someone who is fairly informed about different practices and different cultural contexts. But I was shocked by how little I actually knew about the Romani people and Romani history. And you both do such a beautiful job, not only of sharing these different practices of divination, but of also giving the reader a real kind of a primer in the history and cultural context of the Romani people. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you for that because I learned so much.
Thank you. I mean, it's our pleasure, and we're so grateful that you're giving space to these issues with your platform.
Absolutely. So if you don't mind, and I imagine this might get a little bit tiresome for you to have to do the emotional labor and the mental lift of educating people who aren't informed about the Romani people. But do you mind if we give our viewers and our listeners a little bit of that context? So, who are the Romani people exactly?
I love to give this spiel.
Good. Spiel away, Jezmina. Take it away.
Yeah, so Roma are a diasporic ethnic group originally from India about 1,000 years ago. And the early Roma left India probably because of the invading Ghaznavid Empire. And over about a century of warring, the Romani culture rose up essentially on the battlefields and were displaced after India lost that war. That's the prominent theory right now that linguists have.
That was so well done.
Yay.
You must have said it just once or twice before, I
So many
imagine.
times. And so basically, when Roma started moving west, it was the tail end of the Crusades. So a lot of dark skinned people worshiping many gods showing up then. It went really terribly. And Roma were enslaved for 500 years in present day Romania and were otherwise deported, mistreated. Committed genocide against and all these really horrifying things over the following centuries. And so Roma are about 15 million people worldwide. There are about 10 million Roma in Europe and about 1 million in the US. And then the rest are kind of across the globe. And we have been forced into nomadism and then also persecuted because of that nomadism. But a lot of Roma today actually live settled lives.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, so, in full transparency, I'm of Jewish ancestry. And so I was raised with many, many stories about the Holocaust and World War II, of course. And I am aware that it wasn't just Jewish people who lost their lives. I knew that Romani people were part of this and lots of queer folks of different backgrounds too. I did not know how many Romani people lost their lives during the Holocaust. I was shocked. In your book, you say it's approximately 1 million people.
Yeah, and it could be more because so many of those deaths were
Sure.
not recorded.
Sure. And I was really I felt ashamed that I didn't realize, how huge. I mean, not that it should matter, even if it's one person, it's a tragedy, but I didn't realize how many people were included in that, and it's just absolutely horrific. Um, and also, I have to say that as a person of Jewish descent, and sometimes I say Jewish descent, my people were also diasporic, nomadic, persecuted. And so I saw some parallels between our histories. And so I felt a real kinship, even though obviously we have different contexts and so on, a real kinship with a lot of the stories that you told at the beginning of the book, especially in regard to the way that um, I think we both come from these ancestral backgrounds that are both otherized and demonized, but also exoticized at the same time. So, Paulina, do you think you could speak to that a little bit? Just that push pull of people both like persecuting the Romani people, but also like dressing up like Romani people?
Yeah, it's definitely something we come across often. A lot of the times we see people dressing up as gypsies for Halloween. And that's one thing you'll hear us throwing around the word gypsy often.
Oh,
Although,
we're gonna get into that, my friend.
yeah. But it's interesting how we were persecuted for the clothes that we wore with like all the different colors, as Jez was explaining, going into ultimately basically finding our way through all that persecution into Europe, and then coming in all these colors and being persecuted for that, not really being allowed to work certain jobs, or just kind of be accepted into society. And then I guess we actually inspired like the bohemian style throughout Europe. Just a little fun fact for the listeners.
Exactly, exactly. So, since you brought it up, let's talk about the G word of it all. And I know it's a very charged conversation. I want to make sure that we're having it sensitively. Um, for those who are watching and listening, they might not even realize that the word that you just used is considered a slur in a lot of contexts. And I was wondering, first of all, if you could speak to that. And then I have so many follow up questions. Yeah. Paulina, do you want to take that away?
Yeah, so some of us, some Romani people use gypsy, and that is because we, just feel like we're comfortable ultimately to use it. But it was definitely a misconception as we were traveling into Europe. I don't think the story is completely clear. You might need to jump in a little bit, Jess.
Hmm.
But we were sometimes, I think gypsies would say they were from Egypt, maybe for a little lesser persecution or less treatment, like kind of like we could get away with it. But also, it was not even us saying it some of the times. I think other people were just saying, like, oh, we were from Egypt, we're from Egypt, like Romani people, not really knowing where we come from or respecting where we come from. And so that's how gypsy kind of became a thing. And another little fact, the word gypped is also a slur, and is also just a racist little, I don't know, whatever it's called, like little slur that not a lot of people really know about. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to be clear, so that word, the G word, it was a misnomer to begin with because they thought they were kind of, or the people that were using it thought that the Romani people were from Egypt. Is
Hmm.
that right? So it's already this misnomer. And then was it originally used as an insult? Like a negative epithet, the way the word witch was a negative epithet to begin with?
Yes, you can definitely argue that. It's one of those words that was used a lot for the first time in official decrees condemning Romani people, and so it
Mm-hmm.
would be for deportation or orders of violence against the Romani community, and it would they'd often be referred to as like Egyptians or Gypsies, and so it was in hateful political language. And it's interesting because a lot of that language, gypsy is the official word for Romani people in the UK. And
Mm-hmm.
some people feel like it's a very neutral word. It doesn't bother them at all. And some people are like, there is a slur as our official word
Right.
in the UK. And so we're very respectful of Romani people's different experiences with that word. And we also acknowledge that in the US, it has certainly been used as a slur, gypped, to be treated like a gypsy. Or if people grew up hearing like, oh, behave or the gypsies are going to come take you, or we'll give you away to the gypsies, it's been used in these very negative connotations for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And even the more positive lights where it's like, oh, I'm a gypsy at heart, I'm a free spirit, I'm a wanderer. It's like, oh, babe, that came out of centuries of genocide. That is
Right.
a different vibe. And
Exactly.
so it can be kind of whitewashing in that way. And at the same time, a lot of, like, I grew up using the word as well. I didn't understand it was a racial slur until I got older. And then I was like, oh, that explains so much, because of the
Yeah.
way that my family used the word was so different from how outsiders referred to us.
Yeah. So let's parse this a little further, if you don't mind. There are so many things in pop culture that are called the G word or some derivation thereof. There's obviously the Broadway show.
Mhm.
There's so many songs. I mean, I'm thinking of songs by like Fleetwood Mac and Shakira and Lady Gaga and Jimi Hendrix. Like the list goes on and on and on. And in those contexts, at least let's talk about the songs, let alone the Broadway show, which is problematic in its own way. But the songs, often it's about like a magical, exotic, usually woman, right? Often she's sexy or intuitive or witchy, but these songs tend to be complimentary even as they're othering or exoticizing. So, and let's be clear, neither of you speaks for all Roma people.
Mhm.
No people are a monolith, and you each have your own perspectives. But just because the two of you are here and you wrote this book, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your relationship to the pop culture versions of using that word.
Hmm. You want to start?
Um, I will tell you, like, as confusing as it is to outsiders, unfortunately, like growing up in American pop culture, it's confusing to me too. Like,
Sure.
I feel like Romani people are never represented in media. And when we are, honestly, here's a story. I was watching White Lotus,
Yes.
and the first thing, what was super crazy about it is like, this is where we've gone into media. Like, there's this gypsy. They're like, can you call the gypsy? Like, one of the main characters wants to see a gypsy. And so they bring over this old Italian woman. And I don't actually know if she's played by a Romani character or not, because I'm not the gypsy police, but
Right.
I do know that it did seem very stereotypical. She was reading cards, and you have this negative thing happening to you, blah blah blah. And then at the end of the scene, as she kept referring to her as like, she's a real gypsy, like a real gypsy fortune teller or a real
Mm-hmm.
psychic. And then one of the girls that worked for her was like, I don't think you're supposed to say that. And she's like, oh, come on. And then they just kind of kept going around about their day. But
Right.
I feel like it was such a great scene to a degree, just to acknowledge that, like, this is how it's presented in the world. Like, people are throwing it around, using it around, but it is a slur, in the media. It's like that. The old media involving Romani people, oh, hell no. Like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
good. It is
Right.
definitely not good, yeah.
Right. And at the same time, before we started recording, you were talking about how there are a lot of businesses that have that word in the name. And sometimes those businesses are run by Romani people. And so let's also just state that when you both are using that word, and when many people in your community or of your background are using that word, it's this very intentional, often kind of exercise in reclamation. It's the way, it's not exactly the same. So this is a little bit of a clunky metaphor, but like when I use the word witch, it's like taking a word that was a negative epithet and then using it as this word of reclamation. Although maybe a better example of it is like the F word in the queer community. Like I would never call anyone that anymore, but in the queer community, they call each other that word.
Mhm.
Are these parallels that sort of feel relevant here?
the F word feels akin, and then there's interesting context too, where it's like, I mean, I share that experience with Paulina where I get so excited when I see Romani representation, even if it's not that good. And
Yeah.
like, it usually isn't that good, which is really frustrating because we're in 2025 and people still don't really know who Roma are or how
We
to
get
handle this.
excited though
They
when we
didn't
see
do a
it.
good job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, it does have the multifaceted point where it's like, you know, the F word in the queer community, for instance, has always been used maybe in this derogatory way. Actually, I don't know that much about the history of it, but probably your grandma wouldn't be calling you and everyone else the F word in this sort of like, oh, we're gypsies, you know, be proud of who you are kind of way
Right.
that Paulina and I grew up with, and at the same time have a confusing relationship with the word gypsy. So the super sexualized Romani woman comes directly out of slavery in the way that the super sexualized any woman of color often comes out of experiences like that. Roma are the most highly trafficked group in Europe still.
Wow.
And so a lot of these things have deep cuts that come with them. And so, on one hand, it's like, I love Stevie Nicks just as much as any other tarot reader. And on
Exactly.
the other hand, when I hear that song, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. Okay, that makes such sense. And I'm curious, when you choose, and I promise we won't just stay on this word for much longer, but just because I think it's probably a new conversation for some people watching and listening.
Yeah, it's important too. We're happy to talk about it.
Yeah, great. When you're using that word with each other or publicly, and you write about this in the book, but it's very, very intentional, and it does feel kind of empowering for you, right? It's like you can say it about yourself and about people in your community, but you don't want other people using that word, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about it. Paulina came up with the tagline for our podcast, you know, welcome to Romanistan, we're your friendly neighborhood gypsies, because we wanted to make people feel more comfy with us. And I love it. And at the same time, I work at a shop where I tell fortunes a few days a week. And someone called up once and they were like, oh, can I go see the gypsy reader? And I was like, ooh. And just like,
Yeah,
I know they meant well, but I'm like, oh, I taught you the word Romani, like
right,
for a reason.
right.
But then, Paulina, you also have interesting things to share, so I want to let you talk about that.
Please do.
I think when you say like, do you feel empowered? It's kind of weird because I've never felt empowered saying it like my whole entire life. And
Mm,
now I feel like it's more of like, yeah, like I could say it. I don't know if I would call it empowering, but I would call it like slightly empowering because of spite. You know what I mean? Out of spite.
yeah.
Pride is my favorite motivator.
For
Exactly.
real.
So it's like an act of resistance in a way?
Kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. Like yeah, like this is what I've been growing up saying. And weirdest thing is like sometimes like I hear, when people are like, "Oh, like you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't do this." And I'm like, we have every right to be saying this right now. Like we can do what we want. But
Resistance
Exactly.
is resonating with me more than empowerment. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay. That's great to hear. Yeah, when I was growing up, one of my first oracle decks, and I fully admit this is like problematic across a lot of different vectors, okay? But I was probably 10 years old when I bought, and I won't say the full name, but it was Russian G word fortune telling cards. And I loved these cards. I didn't know better. I was in suburban New Jersey. I got it from, the local new age shop, and it was my early experience with divination. And that was a really meaningful experience to me. And at the same time, now I look back at that and I'm like, wait, Russian and G word, is that even a thing? And also, like, calling it that, and I mean, I see, and I am actually partially of Russian descent, but not, I don't know, there's just a lot of different ways that we could unpack that, and I know that's just one example of these kind of tools and books, and that at, were of their own time, but then I'm just so grateful today to have, and I should say, I do not know the background of the person who invented those cards. I believe she was Russian. Do you know the cards I'm talking about? Are you familiar with them?
I've never
Just
seen those. Have you?
I have actually. I've seen them at a store I used to work at.
they were
They
like
come in like a red.
triangular.
Oh,
Yeah.
triangular. I remember a red box.
Oh no, maybe they were square cards actually with different triangles in them, and you sort of
Yes.
twisted them to match up these different shapes, and then when you saw what the shapes were, and who knows if this person just invented it. This was the 90s. Like, I don't know if that even came from a tradition. I believe the woman who made it was Russian. I do not know if she was Romani. Um, all of this to say, I'm so happy to be educated about this, and your book is a really it's a real act of education and generosity too, because you never come across as like scolding. You're really taking a lot of time to like give us a whole context of this community and this ancestry before even getting into the practices, which I want to get into shortly. So just like a huge thank you, because I learned so much from reading it.
That makes us so happy.
Yeah. Thank
Good,
you.
good. I'm so glad. So let's now slide into the fortune telling aspect of this book, because you share with us many different techniques of divination. You also share with us some beautiful examples of, would you call it goddess worship? I mean, I learned so much about that one figure that you write about. Is it
Sarah, luckily.
Sarah Lakali? Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah. Actually, maybe we could start there. So, who is Sarah Lakali? I mean, I recognize Kali for sure.
Yeah. Well, I love to have another history hour. So,
Yes.
um, it is thought that Roma, coming from India, early Roma, worshipped Kali, the Hindu goddess, and that she came with us on our travels. And not all, but a lot of Roma engage with this figure in some way, whether she's Saint Sarah, or she's Sarah Lakali, or she's some combination of the two, or Kali Sarah, or Sarah Kali. And she is like a goddess saint. She's sort of the uncanonized patron saint of Romani people. And
Mm.
depending on, what kind of religion you may have adopted, you might have different relationships with her. But it's another one of those vestiges that Roma are an Indian diaspora, and she's a really powerful figure, compassionate mother of all Romani people, a
Mm.
protector. And Kali is a fierce and terrifying protector. Sarala Kali almost looks like if Kali and Mary had a baby. She's a little more beatific, and
Yes, yes.
but still, like, her love for the Roma is unending, and we tend to celebrate her in the springtime. Her festival in Europe and France is May 24th and 25th, and I think there's also a festival in Mexico July 25th. And yeah, we really wanted to include her.
Wow, so she's kind of like a Hindu Catholic hybrid in a way?
Yeah, a
Yes.
lot of Romani practices are very syncretic.
Absolutely. Well, it reminds me of a lot of different practices of like different African diasporic practices, like, I mean, Vodou comes to mind, where it's this mapping of like Western African deity and Orisha, and then with Catholic saints, and then it's this kind of hybridization. I find that so interesting. Do you know, or do people know where the Sarah comes from? Because my ear thinks of Sarah, the Jewish, figure in the Old Testament. Do we know if there's any relation there, or does the word Sarah mean something else in this context?
Um, Great question. So, Kali also means black. And because
Hmm.
she's depicted as having very, very dark skin, we sometimes call her Sarah the Black. And what I've read, there's a really great article that you can get for free online by Ronald Lee. We reference it in the book. And if you just type in Ronald Lee, Sarah LaCully, I can't remember the exact title, but He's a wonderful academic and musician who's since passed. And he said that Sarah was believed to be one of Mary's servants when it's a sort of a apocryphal biblical story where, Mary was escaping to France for some reason. And so Sarah
Mhm.
was one of her attendants and was so devout and, sailed with her. And so often we have imagery of her returning to the water, which is really interesting because that's basically the Kali Puja where they
Mhm.
bring the statue into the water. And so there are so many really fascinating parallels, even how we celebrate her with flowers. And there's a beautiful procession of white horses that accompany her statue into the ocean.
That's
And
so gorgeous.
yeah,
Yeah, I find the notion of syncretization to be so rich and fascinating because in some ways it's like there's sadness there because it's maybe a loss or it's a feeling of like colonization or um appropriation or trying to no assimilation, that's the word I'm looking for, of trying to fit into whatever this more oppressive, dominant culture is telling you. On the other hand, I feel like what an act of like survival and resistance to say, like, all right, you're going to tell me that the saints are in charge here. Well, guess what? We're going to like slide in our own deities and just have them wear some of the trappings. And then you get these amazing hybrid deities. And so I just think there's so much to unpack there. That's so beautiful.
yeah.
So I want to talk also about the idea of protective magic. Um, there's a version of the evil eye that you speak about, and I know different evil eye beliefs and practices exist all over the Middle East and throughout various parts of the world. Can you talk a little bit about it in the Romani context? Yeah, Paulina, do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, I kind of have my own theory that may have also been theorized by other people, but I feel like a lot of our protection practices do come from our travels. Like, one thing I think it's pretty popular in Southeast Asia to um, wear like a red ribbon or a red bracelet kind of around your hand, as well as obviously the Middle East and just the evil eye in general. But there's other little like ceremonies that we have for protection. We also do a lot of like burning of different herbs, as well as cleaning has always been a protection kind of, I don't even know, like spell almost.
Yes.
For us for sure. And we would even like if we wanted to bring, money in or clear negative energy, like we would wash the floors and wash outside the front door with salt and soap and yeah, like some herbs and just like interesting things like that. So that's kind of what some of our practices look like.
And again, it's where like the kind of cultural mythologist in me is like, oh my goodness, we're all so similar because I feel like if you go back to virtually any culture, there's practices of purification rituals, there's practices of burning herbs, there's practices of divination, like the red and the red ribbon. That's something that in Kabbalah and like Jewish mysticism we do. So there's like this universality to it, but at the same time, you want to be respectful of the specificity of the cultural contexts and, some of the different, I suppose, political aspects and historical aspects of these practices too. But I found it really interesting that there's also this belief in the evil eye with Romani people. Can you tell me the word? It's a Jakheli, what that word, how that word is pronounced?
Checheli?
Yes. I think that's the word that you use for evil eye in the book. Is that right? Or am I confused?
Yeah,
Hmm.
there's a lot of different dialects, but that's one of them.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
really talked for a long time about which version we
Yeah,
should
we really
use.
didn't know what to use. We were like, whatever
Well,
everybody else says.
that's actually a great jumping off point because to be clear, and you talk about this in the book as well, the Roma people, as we said earlier, is not a monolith. There's all these different subgroups within, under that umbrella. Correct? Can you speak to some of that too?
Yeah, I mean, I use the imperfect metaphor that, in the Americas, it would be silly to say that like all indigenous people are the same.
Sure.
Like there are different tribes, and Roma have vitsas or tribes or large family groups, and we are united by a common history, culture, language, but we also have a lot of differences too in our beliefs, practices, the way that the variants of our language. And yeah, definitely. It's so interesting because, fortune telling, the reason we wrote this book is it's one of our survival trades. And it's a survival trade that is heavily influenced Western fortune telling. And it's something to be really proud of. But a lot of Roma might have very differing opinions. Like Paulina and I grew up in fortune telling families where this was something that we were expected to do to make a living. Other families might see that as something that it's like, oh, that makes us look bad. That's trashy. Other academics are like, can we please pretend that we are not doing this anymore? It's too stereotypical. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
read well. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are other Roma who are like, I wish I grew up in a fortune telling family. Can we do some fortune telling? And so, like, even just with our actual survival traits, there's
Yeah.
a lot of disagreement.
Absolutely, that makes such perfect sense. Speaking of that, I wanted to talk also about a point that you make around intuition, and I love this point. You talk about the fact that, yes, there's this association with Roma people, excuse me, Romani people, and with, people who do fortune telling, and especially women, that there is this like higher intuition, that there is, perhaps this gift of being able to see into this other realm or see the future, what have you. And you talk about the fact that, like, on the one hand, there's something lovely about that. Like, who doesn't want to feel like they're special and have all these gifts? On the other hand, a lot of people who develop their intuition do so because it's a trauma response. It's like we have to be hyper vigilant because we have been on the run or we've been persecuted. I mean, this is something I think a lot about, this idea like women are so much more intuitive than men. It's like, well, we kind of have to be, right? Because we're more likely to be abused and killed. So
Yeah.
we're on a higher alert. And maybe this is a skill set that we have had to develop, and we're taught or what have you. So you bring that up in particular around, the Romani people. And I'd love to hear you tease that out a little bit. Paulina, what does that bring up for you, this idea of your people being quote unquote more intuitive than others?
I definitely feel like intuition is something that you can work on, and I definitely agree with the trauma kind of response comment because I mean, my mom and ancestors, like, we would always talk about, like, oh, like, Roma have been through so much, and, like, that's why, we can see so much. And it's definitely, like, genetically proven that the certain, like, traumas that we go through are carried literally, in those reproduction cells and, like, all this.
Epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it feels so close to home, I would say, especially with all the trauma we have experienced. But
Yeah.
I do feel like what I would say is I do feel like there's a difference. I don't know if I would call it intuition, but I just feel like I think Roma, especially that practice like and have lived in fortune telling families, I feel like there's a little bit level of a difference in like we do this for a living. We've been trained to do this for a living since we were children, and like it's something that comes so naturally to us. So I feel like there is that level. Like I can't deny that, but I don't want to be like we're the only ones and we have the best intuition. Like no, definitely not that. But I think if you're born with it, you grow up with it, and then you foster it, like I think that it could be something great.
Absolutely. Did you have something you wanted to add, Jasmina?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how that stereotype has worked for and against us, and Roma have leaned into it and away from it for different reasons politically over time, and just for survival. I mean, there's a very strong likelihood that Roma are the first people to have used tarot as a divination tool. We were arriving in Europe around the same time they were created as a game. And it's likely that Roma's association with being, magical and intuitive created this whole industry that people love. And even though we're not often credited for it or, given any kind of spotlight for it, this idea that Roma are so intuitive allowed this to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think that, sometimes to survive, Roma might lean into it, and then other times might lean away from it for the same motivation. And I agree with Paulina that, there's something about being raised to do the work that feels really special. There's something about any population that was raised within an ancestral spiritual tradition and has been persecuted probably shares that experience.
Yeah,
It's not just
absolutely.
us either.
Absolutely. So let's get into the fortune telling. You said that you both were raised in fortune telling families. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and then we can dive into some of the specificity on that. So, Paulina, can you talk a little bit about your upbringing? Just, I know that you were featured in a whole podcast about this. But if you could just give us a brief summary of your background, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So I grew up in California. I was born in LA, and fortune telling was something that wasn't crazy popular at the time. And we were expected, my specific family, we're Machwaya Roma is the name of our subgroup or our pizza.
Mhm.
We grew up, so we're kind of like based in the West Coast. And um it was just expected that we do fortune telling. That was a tool, like that was something that Romani people could do, like Jess was saying as well, like for survival, and we could do it anywhere. So as we were traveling or we were with many people, like we were able to always like read someone's palm on the street or go here or have our own store. And a lot of the time we lived in our stores. I was taken out of school early and I had an arranged marriage. That's just something that's practiced when I was 17. I ended up feeling like I didn't really want to live in the specific like standards of my like subgroup or my community.
Mhm.
So I actually decided to take a little break from fortune telling, and I kind of, I think, reinvented my own practice with obviously influences from how I grew up, the business and the spiritual aspect, and then some of my own little kind of Western, I guess, like aspects as well. And that's what it was for me. But it was very much growing up. I was always told like you have to do fortune telling, you can't do anything else. Like, we weren't allowed to go to school. We had to
Wow.
dress modestly. I had to wear a head covering. Like,
And Paulina, is that typical of like a traditional Romani family, or is this do you know what I mean?
yeah, I would say I am from a very conservative subgroup, one of
Okay.
the most conservative subgroups of Romani people in the world. So,
Okay.
yeah, so that was the subgroup that I was born in. But I even had like cousins from different pizzas, or like my grandmother came from a different pizza. Her family was different. They could kind of wear what they want. If they wanted to do fortune telling, they could. If they didn't want to. So there was, or they could wear their hair down, they could wear skirts, some of them could wear pants. Like that was like, woo, like you guys are super,
Yeah, yeah.
Western, but
Edgy.
not, yeah, really edgy, but definitely not my subgroup.
So when did you find your way back to fortune telling? When did you decide that that was something that was important to you or that resonated with you? How old were you about?
um I took the break when I was kind of old, maybe like 22.
It
Like,
almost sounds like you went on like a are you familiar with the term Rumspringa? Like it's when Amish kids, they get a year to like go crazy and go out in the
yeah.
real world, but it almost is sounding to me like you I don't know how extreme your break was if you lost your mind for a while or if it was a little more tame than that. But it sounds like you really had to break away for a little bit and then reintegrate. Is that right?
To a degree for sure. I think that even when I broke away, like I'd still have some clients or I'd still occasionally practice it, but I wasn't like an open, like out there, like I'm a fortune teller anymore. Like for maybe like 1 year, 2 years, I went to school. I took some time to like study in different areas. I got a regular 9 to 5 job and I was like, whoa, like I'm working in an office, like I'm a real American. Like I
Yeah.
felt so, yeah, like everything was crazy. But it didn't compare like when you're fortune telling and like you're having a deep conversation with someone, like right off the bat, there's a spiritual aspect. There is such a deep love for it. And I think just as time went by, I was like, I definitely want to keep doing fortune telling. And when I did get into it, I was persecuted by the people that were proud of me because I left, and I
Hmm.
was persecuted by other gypsies. They were like, "You
Mm.
want to continue doing fortune telling? Like that's our practice, but you're like out there." And they would say like with the gadre, which basically means like I'm out in the American world and like
With the
showing this.
non-Romani people, Gadra.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was a weird little time, but I really feel like it was no issue to me now. Like you can obviously do both. Like I could wear my hair down and be with who I want and still do fortune telling.
Yeah, yeah. So, Jasmina, what about you? How did you find your way towards fortune telling?
So I grew up in a really different context. My family is mixed. My maternal grandmother is the Romani line in my family, and her family is Sinti, which is a vitsa that's most common in Germany, Austria, and northern Italy. And so when I was about 5, I mean, I spent so much time with my grandmother. She was a huge, huge part of my life. She only passed away the year that we finished writing the book.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry to hear that.
yeah, I miss her. And she uh, really wanted to impart as much as the culture as she could on me. She grew up hiding her ethnicity in Nazi Germany, which
Mm.
is pretty intense. And it's a complicated thing, but basically, her family was taken in by a German farmer who actually wasn't that great. You would think he sounds like a saint, but he kind of sucked. And
Mhm.
and so, she had a very fragmented relationship with her culture, but she grew up still hearing all these stories, and she was taught fortune telling and like lots of cultural practices from her grandparents and her mother. But when she came to America, she didn't necessarily raise her own children that way. And instead, she sprung it on them surprise in their 20s that they were Romani. And they were like, I'm sorry, what? and,
Whoa.
um, and she was a little like not sure how much she wanted to share with them. But for whatever reason, when I came around, she really wanted to share a lot with me. So she raised me a lot like she was raised, starting when I was really young. This is our trade, this is what we do. And it was really the most beautiful part of my childhood. I had a challenging childhood in a lot of ways, and so that was really a beautiful outlet and resource for me.
Jasmina,
And
where did you say you grew up? I'm sorry,
I
I
grew up
missed
in
that.
New Hampshire. Yeah,
Mhm,
grew up
mhm.
in New Hampshire. Very homogenous,
Yeah.
especially in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and so I stuck out a lot. She told me not to tell anyone we're gypsies because it's also interesting. A lot of Roma fortune tellers never actually call themselves Roma because it's still dangerous to do that.
Mhm.
And so it's not like we're profiting big time off of calling
Yeah,
ourselves
yeah,
gypsies.
yeah.
And so yeah, like most Romani kids, I slip up. We experience a lot of racism and discrimination after that. But these practices were in my culture was a really big part of me, and I felt really motivated to understand where we came from. I didn't even really understand. I was, probably 16 when I realized that Roma came from India, and my mind was so blown. And I was always encouraged to pursue whatever I wanted, but so I'm a writer, and I also do fortune telling, and I've always done those two things. And clients were so scarce, like Paulina was saying, like when we were kids, fortune telling wasn't that popular in the
Yeah.
US, even
Yeah.
less so in New Hampshire. So a lot of my first clients were horses, and I would read for why a horse was lame or why it was biting everyone who worked at the barn.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like little parties and things like that.
Wow. And how did you 2 come to know each other?
I love it when Paulina tells the story.
Oh, please do.
So I tell the beginning and then Jess takes it from there.
Okay.
So As I left the community when I was leaving, I was also like in this custody battle. It's Roma actually have their own court system. Like they don't usually, when you're in closed community, you don't go to like outside court people. Like obviously
Wow.
unless it's an emergency, you can call the police. But other than that, like it's just not allowed. And one of our like laws or rules is that if a couple like separates, the man always gets the kids unless he doesn't want them. And so that's kind of just our group. Yeah, that's the way it is. Or they'll split them, which is rare, but it happens. And basically, I wanted to go to court. And once I had left and kind of was like, whoa, like I can actually, fight for my children and like I have all these rights and stuff. I did feel like there was other people like reaching out, feeling like they didn't belong in their community or like they wanted to get out, but they didn't really completely feel that great in the outside world because they're like, we grew up so differently. Like, you know, they were just kind of reaching out, and like I was wanting to figure out a way to like communicate with people. And I had seen a video of Jess talking about like Roma, and that like gypsy is a slur. And what's super crazy is I didn't ever use the word Roma, like, or gypsy. I was like, I know I'm gypsy, but what is like Roma? We say Roma. So like it must be the same thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so and then I think I had emailed you, and then we had talked. I will tell you this, when I called Jess, I was like, I have this idea. I don't know, maybe a podcast, maybe this, maybe that. And Jess was like, no, you got the wrong person.
Oh, do tell, Jezmina.
So, I it was 2020. I had just gotten COVID, and I was really suffering with long COVID, and my mom
Mm,
had just died.
mm.
It was a really tough time, and I was having a little bit of a crisis of identity where I felt like I sort of accidentally became like a spokesperson for Roma when really I just wanted to like write my feelings like in my poems
Yeah.
and stories and be like, also I'm mixed Roma. And a lot of people are understandably like, who are you to talk about us? You're mixed and assimilated. And so I was having this feeling where I was like, I can't take up that much space in community. Like, that doesn't feel okay to me. Also, everyone's dead and I'm sick. And so I was really struggling. And so I was like, but I'll find you someone, don't worry. And so I was reaching out to a bunch of folks who I thought maybe would be a good co-host for Paulina, and everyone was like, just do it. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, give me a few months and let me pull myself together and we'll do
Wow,
it.
so have you met in person ever?
No, well,
Oh
oh
my,
yeah, we have
You have.
ever, but we
well, now
hadn't.
we have.
Now we have, but it was over a year before we met, and we were doing this podcast together.
Wow, and
Maybe 2 years.
that's so beautiful, and then you decided to write this book together. And I'm feeling very self-conscious because we're almost out of time, and I feel like we spent most of our time on the first, like, third of the book. I wanna be clear with people that so much of this book is about the actual practice of divination and fortune telling. And, I hope you'll forgive me that we've taken so much time just giving people the context and the education. I think it's really valuable and important. But I want to emphasize that that is not the only thing this book is about. This book is also about the practice of fortune telling. And just quickly, you talk about the practice of course, tarot and reading cards. You talk about reading palms and faces. You talk about tea leaf reading and coffee ground reading. And something I really love also is you get into the business of fortune telling, the ethics of fortune telling, how you can be a good reader, how you can do it with a lot of integrity and morals and spiritual, I'll just call it like high frequency intentions and stuff. So it's just a wonderful book. I want to make sure I give you both a little bit of time to talk about what else is in the book that you want to make sure people know about. Paulina, let's start with you. What else do you want to make sure that people are aware of when it comes to the practice of fortune telling, and what felt important to you to share in the book?
I would say what is important to me about fortune telling in our book, I think, is the differences between fortune telling as you know it because Romani people, it has been such an ancient practice for us. And I feel like it's just going to be super cool for everyone and like outsiders to be able to get a little peek or a big peek into how the practice is in our community and how they can incorporate it in their practice. So, how the readers can incorporate it, including like some of our ceremonies or spiritual ceremonies, some of our herbal remedies, those are also pretty good. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
also other little tips like how to deal with skeptics. That's one of my favorite parts.
Yes.
Because not a lot of people talk about it, but we know how to read people because we've been doing it for a long time. And on top of that, like we know how to have fun with it and we also know how to make a living out of it. So, yeah.
Beautifully said. Jezmina, what do you want to add?
I find that a lot of people, once they realize that, especially tarot is a Romani survival trait, it's a cultural practice, they're like, oh my God, how am I supposed to engage with it now? And so our book is really telling you, like, this is how you can do that. You
Yeah.
can, uplift Roma and you can educate others and you can not use the G word to market yourself, etc. So we have that kind of stuff if you're like, what do I do? And we also include some other really practical tips on how to build your intuition, because that's what a lot of our training was. And so if you feel like you are familiar with these tools, but you want to really learn how to read intuitively, we really show up for that, because there are lots of tarot books out there, but this is a Romani tarot book or,
Absolutely.
fortune telling book. And so I love the intuition exercises, and we also give you a look at some of the less common practices like fire reading, trinket reading that Roma do, especially for ourselves, but you might not be familiar with.
Yes. And just to be clear, this book is for a, we'll just call it a general
Mhm.
audience.
Yeah.
And you are not saying that these practices are like, this isn't a closed practice where if someone is reading tarot or tea leaves, you wouldn't accuse them of being culturally appropriative or doing anything wrong. You're not saying don't do it if you're not Roma. You're saying just know, the history and do it with a little more sensitivity. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can read tarot in a super culturally appropriative way, and I've seen it. And so this book is sort of like, yeah,
How
of
to.
course you can do it, but here's how.
Mhm. Mhm. Wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. In our final moments together, I know people are going to want to know how they can connect with you. So if you could share everything about where to find the book, the podcast, each of you online, and so on. Paulina, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so you can listen to our podcast, the Romanistan podcast, anywhere you find your podcast, really. And you can also listen on our website at romanistanpodcast.com. And we also have an Instagram at Romanistan Podcast. You can find me on Instagram. My fortune telling business or my holistic business is Romani Holistic on Instagram at Romani Holistic. My website's kind of under construction right now. And then my personal Instagram underscore Paulina underscore B underscore.
Perfect. And Jasmina, what else should we know about you and where to find your beautiful work?
Wow. You can find me on Instagram at Jezmina.Von Thiele. I also have a Patreon where I put out a lot of other content. So follow me there. And I have some very affordable tiers. And if you want to hear conversations, we interview a lot of different Romani people from different walks of life on our podcast. So if you want to hear more conversations about Romani culture in general, definitely tune into Romanistan podcast.
Fabulous. Well, I want to thank each of you for writing this book. I want to thank you for being patient with my many questions and my ignorance, which you are helping to shrink quickly. And I just really, really enjoyed talking to you both and reading your words and hearing your words here in this conversation. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Oh yeah, I have a website too, JezminaVonThiele.com. Sorry, forgot that. Also that.
Great, great. Well, we will make sure the people know that as well. Thank you
Thank
both
you.
so much.
Thank you.